Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on Imprivata Confirm ID. This is Michelle Lero with Imprivata. I'll be your host for today's session. Also joining me here today from Imprivata, we have Dan Borgasano, the Product Marketing Manager for Imprivata Confirm ID. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
Also joining us is John Del Caso from Imprivata. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
And Dan and John are going to kick off our presentation in just 1 minute, but I do have a few housekeeping items for the audience. First off, we are recording today's session, so if you want to get a copy of the recording or you want to forward this on to a colleague, you will receive that automatically. In your email inbox, look for that in the next 1 to 2 business days. You'll get an email from us with a link to the on-demand recording, and you can feel free to forward that on to anyone else who might be interested in today's presentation. Second, if you're having any trouble with the audio or video portion of today's webinar, usually your best bet is to log out and log back in again. If you're still having trouble, sometimes there can be issues with different types of connections. Again, we do have that on-demand version, and you'll have no issues with the on-demand version. So usually at that point, your best bet is to watch the on-demand version. And then finally, we will take questions today, so please feel free at any time. You don't need to wait until the end. At any time, go ahead and enter questions on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a Q&A box. You want to go ahead and enter your questions into the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and then Dan and John will field those questions at the end of today's presentation. So with that, that is enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. And thanks again, everyone, for joining today. Here's a quick agenda of what we'll be covering on today's webinar. We'll start with a little bit about, why EPCS, electronic prescribing for controlled substances, matters, and what are some of the drivers to adoption that we're seeing along with the benefits. We'll walk through some of the regulatory requirements for EPCS, and then we'll turn it over to John, who will walk you through our solution, Imprivata Confirm ID, and how it can help you meet a lot of the regulatory requirements for EPCS while also giving your providers a fast, efficient EPCS workflow. Then we'll open it up to some questions. So starting off with why EPCS matters. Well, first there's a societal impact. Prescription overdose deaths are rising at an all-time high, and in 2013 there were more than 2,300 deaths from prescription medications, and you can see here that that's more than twice as many as cocaine and heroin combined. And it seems like hardly a day goes by that we don't read something about this national public health epidemic. And this was really the catalyst behind the DEA legalizing EPCS because they really see it as an opportunity to stem this problem by addressing doctor shopping and fraud and things like that. But we're also seeing a number of other sort of factors and drivers to adoption, one of which is the dual prescribing workflow that many of your providers are faced with. So especially if they're already prescribing non-controlled substances electronically, then they've got these two workflows, paper-based for controlled and electronic for non-controlled, and that really creates inefficiencies, frustration for your providers, and it's also dissatisfactory for patients because they're forced to deal with two types of medications. And what's really exacerbated that challenge is, the number of prescriptions for controlled substances that are being written is increasing, and we'll talk about this more momentarily, but the overall volume of controlled substances may not be going up, but instances of prescribing are, and this is really exacerbating, again, the challenges of dual prescribing workflows. Also, what's happening in New York has been a catalyst for EPCS nationally. As some of you may be familiar, there's a law in New York known as I-STOP, which mandates electronic prescribing of all medications, including controlled substances. The deadline to comply with that is March of 2016, so that has really driven technology and pharmacy readiness, which again has been a catalyst for EPCS adoption nationally. And then finally, there are fraud and drug diversion risks associated with the provider having their DEA number exposed on a paper prescription. In fact, we have studies that show about 1 in 9 physicians admit to having their DEA number stolen, and that really fuels a lot of the drug diversion, fraud, and doctor shopping challenges that we see that are leading to this national public health epidemic. So to talk just a little bit more in detail about the challenges of dual prescribing workflows, again, if you look at the percentage of your overall prescriptions that are controlled substances, you may find that it's 10, maybe 20%, but that doesn't really paint the picture of the challenges of these dual prescribing workflows. We talk to physicians to understand their prescribing habits, and as you can see here, 59% of patient interactions in which medication is prescribed involve a controlled substance, 6 out of 10. And 38%, there's a mix. So a patient is going to receive a prescription for at least one controlled substance and at least one non-controlled substance. So you can see the challenge of prescribing workflow and the inefficiencies that creates, the dissatisfaction for both providers and your patients. Again, there are patient safety issues associated with this, and potentially meaningful use could be at risk. As we move to stage 2 and stage 3, there will be e-prescribing requirements for hospitals, and if you don't include controlled substances in your denominator, you may risk hitting your numbers because your providers might revert to the single paper-based workflow for all medications as a matter of efficiency. So really what's exacerbated some of these challenges is the DEA's reclassification of hydrocodone products such as Vicodin last year. They moved from a Schedule 3 to a Schedule 2 controlled substance, which really puts tighter controls on how and how often they can be prescribed. For example, no refills or no verbal or fax orders. Now, given the volume of these types of medications that are prescribed, 135 million prescriptions written in 2013, this has really increased the frequency with which providers are going to actually have to write prescriptions for controlled substances. And you can see here, based on our conversations with physicians, this one rule change alone has the potential to increase the number of prescriptions written for controlled substances by 68%, which again is really going to exacerbate the challenges they'll have with those dual workflows. In fact, we actually have a customer in California that accelerated its EPCS plans when that ruling came down because he knew the impact that it would have. So electronic prescribing of controlled substances, EPCS, can have a benefit. It can really address a lot of these challenges and has benefits to stakeholders across the continuum. So for your providers, first and foremost, it eliminates that dual workflow. It eliminates the risk of having their DEA number and signature out there on a piece of paper that can easily be adjusted or diverted, forged. And there's a patient satisfaction element. And so for those patients, they have a single way of getting their medication. They can avoid long lines at pharmacies and long waits, fewer trips to the doctor's office. And we hear that while much of the legislation designed to prevent opioid and prescription drug abuse is something that's moving forward, the unintended consequences of that patients that actually need these medications, it's really they're really suffering as a result of that, and EPCS can help alleviate those challenges. And then for the broader administration and the health system, there are improved patient satisfaction with EPCS, again, reduced risk of drug diversion and fraud, and meaningful use benefits, as we talked about. And for UIT, that basically means happy, satisfied customers across the board. But in order to deploy EPCS, we've got to meet the DEA requirements. And if you've looked at the DEA's interim final rule, you know that it's fairly complex, and there are a number of requirements you have to meet. At a high level, the state needs to authorize EPCS, and to this point, all 50 states now allow Control 2 through 5 controlled substances to be prescribed electronically. EMRs need to be certified. And again, as a result of what's happening in New York, that has really driven EMR certification across the board, and so those vendors are now ready nationally. Similarly, pharmacies need to be certified to receive prescriptions for controlled substances electronically. And because of what's happening in New York, a lot of them are, and SureScripts projects that about 75% of pharmacies nationally are ready. And you also need two-factor authentication in place, which we'll talk about in more detail at the time of prescribing. But again, if you've looked at the rule, then you know that it's much more complex than that. The the whole idea of the DEA interim final rule is to create what we like to call a secure chain of trust between the time the prescription is written, verifying that it comes from an authorized prescriber, verifying they are authorized to write prescriptions for a controlled substance, and all the way through to the time the patient picks it up. And so, as a result, there are a number of steps that need to be taken, a number of requirements that need to be fulfilled. For example, identity proofing. Organizations need a system for confirming that the person signing a prescription is eligible to do so, according to the DEA, and at least 2 people need to approve that list in the organization of who is authorized, again, creating this chain of trust. They also need to be properly enrolled into the system and their credentials activated for EPCS. As mentioned, they need 2-factor authentication at the time of prescribing, which, if not done correctly, can really have an impact on workflow and therefore EPCS adoption. And then there needs to be reporting and auditing around all of this to show that you completed all of these steps and that you're meeting the DEA requirements. So now I'll turn it over to John, who will introduce you to Imprivata Confirm ID and walk you through how we can help you solve a lot of these challenges, simplify the complexities of the DEA requirements, and again, really give your providers a workflow that they will have a great experience with and make EPCS a success in your organization. John?
Thanks, Dan. So Imprivata ID or Confirm ID is the fast, secure solution for EPCS. Imprivata built it as a comprehensive solution to meet most of the DEA requirements for EPCS while helping providers address the inefficiencies and potential fraud caused by paper-based prescriptions. So, for example, the current paper-based system, as Dan mentioned, allows for the possibility of the provider's DEA number to easily be misused. And then the other problem with paper prescriptions is the need for special paper or a special printer that does microprinting that many states have enacted. And that paper piece is really cumbersome and is creating its own inefficiencies and frustrations. Confirm ID is helping with all this by creating a secure chain of trust and by simplifying the identity proving process, enabling a supervised enrollment process, and enforcing the 2-factor authentication requirements, all while maintaining a comprehensive audit trail throughout the whole process. So Confirm ID does this by creating a complete identity proofing process for the providers using either an institutional or the individual model. For institutions, Imprivata Confirm ID streamlines the identity proofing process by enabling administrators to easily assign specific roles and responsibilities for identity proofing, and implementing and enforcing workflows for the 2-person approval process as mandated by the DEA. And so for individual practitioners, Imprivata Confirm ID also includes a GSA-approved credentialing service to satisfy that DEA requirement for the individual identity proofing for EPCS. Confirm ID also allows the enrollment of a provider's credentials in the system, and we can do that either automatically with semantics for the individual process, or through a supervised enrollment process that Imprivata created that's built into Confirm ID. And that supervised enrollment process is really a key piece to helping get adoption, because we're able to, the user is able to, or what we call an enrollment supervisor, is able to go around and use any computer to enroll a provider. So they can do that via enrollment fairs or literally just walk up to a computer that the provider is at and say, hey, can we enroll you, and get that done. And that's one of the things that we found is one of the bigger problems to adoption with EPCS is actually getting going out, finding the doctors, and getting them identity proofed. And this Confirm ID is built with that in mind to help get out there and get those doctors enabled. So we also support, Confirm ID supports a broad range of the 2-factor authentication modalities for EPCS. I'm going to get into more detail on that in a second, but it's really about providing flexibility for your providers, depending on what their workflow is, where they are, for example, if they're at home and they need to prescribe, or whether they're within your premise, in their office, or from an exam room, and being able to give them the flexibility to prescribe no matter where they are. A big part of Confirm ID is the amount of time Imprivata has spent working with EMR vendors to so that a Confirm ID is integrated directly into the prescribing workflow. And that's a huge part of that because it makes it very fast and convenient, and it's seamless for the end user. So the provider doesn't have to change their workflow to do this. It's all built in. And again, that integration with the EMR vendors just gives you a level of security too that we've already done all that work for you. And then the other piece that wraps this all together is the auditing and reporting functionality. So all the necessary records for an entire EPCS process are built into Confirm ID, and it helps you establish that secure chain of trust that your providers, but also your organization is looking for to make sure that that's a complete process all the way through, that who is the person who is doing the prescribing is who they say they are, and tracking those, and we can also track what modality that user used in order to prescribe. Next. As I mentioned, Improvider is taking a lot of time to integrate directly into the EMR to make it seamless, and that's a huge benefit for the providers. But also we have the ability to support all those different DEA compliant two-factor authentication modalities. So as Dan mentioned, there's the three options that the DEA allows. There's something I have, something I know, and something I am. And we're able to take different versions of all three of those and make a very easy workflow for the users to give them the flexibility to do what they need to do. Confirm ID is also very intelligent in the fact that when Improvider built it, we wanted to make sure there was minimizing confusion. And what I mean by that is, if a provider walks up to a computer that doesn't have a fingerprint reader, for example, Confirm ID will not present a fingerprint as the option. It would default to a token if the user has a token. But also on that same note, if there was a fingerprint reader, but Confirm ID realizes that the user hasn't enrolled a finger yet, we also have the Confirm ID would also realize that that's not an option for that user at that time. They need to wait till they get enrolled, and so it would also put up the token as the option instead. So very intelligent in the way that's done to minimize confusion of what they can or can't do. And then lastly, also for those customers that already have an SSO solution in place that may not be Improvider, we operate independent of our normal one-sign product, so you can still operate SSO with that. On the next. So as I mentioned, Improvider spent a lot of time when the interim final rule came out, looking at what the DEA requirements were and figuring out how to meet that, with also going and looking at providers' workflows. Improvider we do healthcare security, and we do it. We've been doing it for a long time, and so we know workflows. And that's the one thing we wanted to make sure we were doing as we were going through this, is making sure that the workflows and the options we provided to the providers were going to be the best options possible, but within DEA allowed rules. And so, as we mentioned, DEA allows us three different options. There's something I am, something you know, and something I have. Now, Improvider Confirm ID solves the something I am with a standard fingerprint biometric. DEA requires FIPS 201 compliant biometric reader, and the user has to be enrolled on a FIPS compliant reader and be signing on a FIPS compliant reader. And Confirm ID satisfies that for the user. Something I know is this is something we run into a lot, is a lot of organizations automatically assume something I know might be a PIN. Well, Improvider and our auditors, and we've looked at that pretty intensively, and we've come to the conclusion that really is something I know must be a NIST compliant password. And NIST is generally pretty stringent on the requirements, and so what most people are reading that to be is a full 8-character password, uppercase, lowercase, some special characters, and maybe some numbers in there. So something along those lines. And then the last option that the DEA allows is something I have. And something I have has to be a FIPS 140-2 compliant device. And so what that ends up being is these one-time password tokens. And those tokens, a lot of people are familiar with those, and they might already use them for remote access or something like that. And that's the hardware token. You kind of see a little graphic of it on at the top right there, and that's a hard token. And all that's doing is that's using an encryption algorithm that's unique to that device, so it's unique to that user, and that's generating a 6-digit PIN every 30 to 60 seconds. That's unique to that user. And so the user would take out that hardware token, read the number off of it, and manually enter the number into Confirm ID to do that. Now, those key fobs are a little bit problematic because it requires that you actually have an extra device to carry around and do that. And so a lot of organizations that I've been working with have really gone and started trying to use what we call soft tokens whenever possible. And a soft token is literally a smartphone, so an iPhone or Android device that has an app on it from the token vendor, and the user would take out their phone, they would unlock their phone, they would open the app, and there's the 6-digit PIN on there. And that helps to solve the problem of making sure I'm carrying an extra device around, because pretty much every provider nowadays is usually carrying that phone around anyway. And so we're helping with that by just leveraging that device they already have. Now, Imprivata, we've been working on and released this year to help augment this the one-time password solution is what we call hands-free authentication. This is something unique to Imprivata that only we have because we developed it and patented it. And what that is we're taking that same token that's on that smartphone and wirelessly transmitting over secure Bluetooth, and it's a low-energy Bluetooth, directly to the computer the provider is doing that transaction from. And so the provider doesn't have to take the phone out of their pocket. They don't have to open the phone. They don't have to read it. They don't have to manually enter that number anymore. And that is solving that something I have requirement, making it very easy. And so on this next slide, you'll see a little more detail on hands-free. So hands-free, and we'll go through the process a little bit here. And this will give you the idea of all Confirm ID transactions, but specifically focusing on hands-free. And that is, so when the provider's in and about to place an EPCS order, this is where the integration with the EMR comes in. The EMR that you're using will call Confirm ID up, and that's where Confirm ID will know the user and provide whatever the easiest method of authentication is. And this user is going to put in a fingerprint because they have a fingerprint reader and they're enrolled in it, so they put their finger down. That's their first factor of the two. And then as soon as that happens, Confirm ID knows that user has a hands-free token and goes out over the secure Bluetooth. And again, it's the low-energy Bluetooth, so we're not draining their battery. Goes out, gets that token directly from the provider's phone, and that allows them to complete the transaction very quickly. Because if you were following that whole process, the provider didn't have to touch the keyboard at all in order to do that. They put their finger down for a fingerprint, and the token piece was done automatically for them. So that's what a few doctors I've shown this to have called the nirvana, right? It's the authentication solution that they've been waiting for that doesn't slow them down every time they want to do a transaction. And when we start talking, I've been doing this for a while now, and you talk to those providers who like ortho and pain management clinics and cardiac care and all those guys, they prescribe a lot of Schedule 2s a day. And some of them, we were counting, we're up to 60 or 70 Schedule 2s a day. And if we throw a normal token in their hands with a 6-digit PIN, they had to enter along with a full password. That would you can just imagine how often that's going to slow them down. And now with hands-free authentication, we've sped up that process to really. There's almost no difference from what they were doing before, and actually it's going to be quicker because they don't have to go out to a special, to the printer out in the hallway, get that prescription and bring it in, sign it, and do all those things. So we saved them quite a bit of time. The next thing we have is the benefits for the IT staff. And when we're looking at IT staff, I think they're generally looking for a low total cost of ownership. So making things as easy as possible. And the way we're doing that with Confirm ID is we can use Confirm ID to support multiple EMRs in the same enterprise. So we have a lot of organizations that are acquiring other hospitals, and each one might have different EMRs. And so Confirm ID can support those different EMRs all at the same time. And we can do that all through one identity proofing event. So the provider only has to get identity proof once, and they're set for the entire organization, no matter where they go. And so that identity proofing event and the credential and enrolling your credentials is a little bit more detail that I was talking about earlier. Is if you choose to do an institutional method of ID proofing, what you can, when you send out your, what we call the enrollment supervisor, they will go out and find that provider. They would put their finger down and their token at the same, and then enroll their finger and their token all at the same time, making that very quick process for them, and not having to go through multiple processes. And then a lot of organizations, once they've already done the enrollment the first time, and all they're doing is adding new providers into their system, they can do that all through the normal the credentialing process, where the doctor has to come in and do the normal credentialing piece for all the other things they have to do for background checks. They can do this at the same time, and it makes it pretty easy for them. And then also, again, as I was mentioning earlier, is the central system for reporting is ConfirmID stores all this information in one secure database that is tamper-proof. And it's very easy to access, generate reports from, and generates reports that the DEA requires in order to successfully do EPCS. So I think I would just, as we've gone through everything, I think you see that ConfirmID is a complete solution, right, for identity proofing. It's doing the identity proofing, the supervised enrollment, we're doing the 2 factors, and we've got that auditing and reporting all built in. And so I hope you agree that we take a lot of time to build that product, the ConfirmID product, and we're pretty happy with it. And the customers that I have that are now live on it are really happy with it, and how much it's actually helped getting rid of the paper-based system and getting rid of all those things that Dan was mentioning earlier, is the multiple workflow, the dual workflows, and those type of things. So thank you, guys.
Great.
I'll hand it back to Dan.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. So before we open up the questions, you just wanted to quickly talk about sort of where Imprivata ConfirmID fits into the overall Imprivata family of products. Some of you may be familiar with some of these, but really quickly, you know, the notion here for Imprivata is that we want to give you solutions that will help you balance your security and compliance needs with the need to make your technology readily available to your providers for better patient care, to streamline workflows, make the use of technology convenient. And so, you know, you can see Imprivata here is one of our 4 security platforms, but we also offer others for fast, secure access to desktops and virtual desktop workstations. We offer a secure communications platform, ConfirmID, as we've been discussing, and then Imprivata Patient Secure, which is a positive patient identification solution. You know, all these solve different challenges. Certainly, if you're interested in learning more about one of them, you can contact us, but I want to put Imprivata ConfirmID in the context of the things that we're doing. So I think with that, we'll open up the questions, and we certainly have a few coming in. Just as a reminder, just use the Q&A function on the WebEx to submit your question, and John and I will do our best to answer this. Okay, I think, John, the first question here I'll pass over to you, and it's, does the DEA approve tap card system as the second factor of authentication for EPCS?
Oh, yeah, so that's a very common question that we get all the time, especially since most of our customers are already using our one-time product to do tap and go with those tap cards. But no, unfortunately, DEA is very specific in the something I have requirement, and it has to be something that is a FIPS 140-2 requirement. And so a tap card is not secure enough to meet that requirement, unfortunately. So that's why we fall into those one-time password tokens as the something I have.
Great. And so we've got another question here about if a provider is already logged into their EMR, have they already completed the first factor of authentication? More of a workflow question. John, I'll let you answer that one as well.
Sure, and that's another one that the way we read the IFR, we think it's pretty clear that the DEA is saying that at the time of transaction, you must be entering those 2 factors, which would mean that the login to the EMR, the password that you use when you log in, does not count as that. You would still have to enter your password at the time of the transaction and at the time of each transaction. So if you're doing multiple patients, each transaction, you can do 1 transaction per patient, but for each patient you would have to enter your password as well. So.
Right. And so we've got another question here asking whether Imprivata Confirm ID presupposes the use of a fingerprint biometric device. And I think that goes back to when you were talking, John, about how Imprivata Confirm ID is smart enough to know which modalities are available and allowed. So I'll let you just elaborate on that a little bit more.
Actually, no, honestly, I'm not entirely sure I understood the question. When we say presupposes the fingerprint, are we asking whether? Do you think we're asking whether it's if they've already had a fingerprint in a system that they can use that? Is that what we're asking?
Yeah, let's assume that for now.
Okay. Yeah. So I think the inner final rule has a lot of things in it, and what we've seen over and over again is we want to have a very high level of security that the person who's doing the prescribing is who they say they are, and so that's why we've come up with that concept of the enrollment supervisor as someone in your organization when you're doing the institutional identity proofing process that would literally go check the ID of the person, the physical picture ID of the person who's doing the prescribing, and then allow them to do the prescription. And then when they're done with that, on top of that, to make sure we're sure of that, that person who's doing the witness would also, if you were doing a fingerprint, for example, they would put their finger down as that witness, that they witnessed that event. And so if there was already a fingerprint enrolled in the system, you probably don't have a very high level of confidence that that person, you're not necessarily sure that that's who they were, who they say they were, because they probably weren't, didn't have someone checking their ID when they enrolled that fingerprint the first time. So.
Great. And so we have a number of questions coming in here about which EMRs or e-prescribing applications that we work with. And I would say that for those specific questions, just contact Imprivata about your specific environment and what EMRs and versions that you're using, and we can walk you through what we configure to support. But generally speaking, one of the advantages of Imprivata Confirm ID is our integrations with the broadest range of EMRs, and that'll really give you the flexibility, especially if you're using multiple different systems for different things. But again, we encourage you to contact us directly on that. So here's an interesting one, again, related to workflow. So can we use more than one modality for two-factor authentication? And I would say yes, not only can you, but we encourage it, again, based on workflow requirements. So as John sort of alluded to, the workflow requirements within the acute care hospital setting may be very different from when a provider is at their home or at their home office. In the hospital setting, fingerprint biometric and hands-free might be the optimal two-factor authentication combo, whereas it's probably not likely or feasible for your provider to have a FIPS-compliant fingerprint reader at their home office, so they may want a soft token there. We have another question here about a bunch of questions coming in, I guess, about our hands-free authentication. So, John, maybe you could take this one. We have a question here asking whether the devices need to be paired, since it does work over Bluetooth.
Oh, sure. So, hands-free was designed specifically to not have to pair with different devices. When you walk up, it's the actual computer that you're on is actually going to search for the provider's actual device. It's going to look for a one-to-one match, and that's it. So, nope, pretty easy that way.
Great. So we've got another question about tokens. Attendee is asking, who maintains and distributes the token?
Aha. Yeah, so and that's going to depend a little bit on your organization and whether you choose individual versus institutional identity proofing. Now, usually your IT and your organization can pick a little bit how that happens. It's the key piece is really that when that token is enrolled into Confirm ID, that it is either witnessed by an enrollment supervisor during institutional identity proofing, or if you're using individual identity proofing, that you've gone through that credential service provider process, that NIST level assurance, the assurance level 3, and that's when they can actually enroll that token. So how the organization gets the token to the provider, I've actually seen that different for different organizations. But the actual getting the token into the system is actually the key piece there, and that's done one of those two ways, depending on whether you're individual identity proofing or institutional.
So we've got another question here about hands-free authentication. Specifically, how does the system identify the specific provider's device when using hands-free? And that's another great question. We get it quite a bit. When hands-free authentication is called within Imprivata Confirm ID, it is only looking for one phone or one device, and it's the device belonging to the provider who's already logged in to the application. So even if you have many physicians and providers around who all are enabled for hands-free authentication, it's only going to look for that single provider's device. So you could have, in instances where there are shared workstations and things like that, multiple instances of prescribing going on, where you'll be able to do that without problem, without interruption, because again, it's only looking for that specific phone. Got another question here about pharmacy readiness, and wondering, what pharmacies are able to receive EPCS. So, as I think I mentioned previously, ShareScripts actually has some pretty good data on this, and they estimate that about 75% of pharmacies nationwide are enabled for EPCS. They actually keep a good database on their website of specific pharmacies where you can go and enter your zip code. But one of the tips as a sort of a best practice that we hear from a lot of our customers is that they contact their local pharmacies before going live with EPCS, just to let them know that it's coming, and that they're going to start sending prescriptions for controlled substances electronically. And that way they can ensure the pharmacies will be ready and that there won't be any interruption for the patient, any dissatisfaction, things like that. By and large, most pharmacies are ready, as I say, but it is definitely good practice to make sure you're communicating with them ahead of time. So we've got another question here, John, on on the hands-free authentication that I think I'll let you answer. Is there a database that is maintained in the Confirm ID system or elsewhere that identifies each provider's device enabled for hands-free?
Yeah, so that's built into the Confirm ID system is a database, and that database is keeping track. So that's done during the enrollment process. So just like when we were talking about enrolling the token, the normal token a second ago, hands-free is enrolled very similarly. Is we'll go and do the enrollment of that at a specific time, and then we're going to assign. There's actually an application, an app on your smartphone that's called hands-free, and that's going to have a unique identifier on it. And when you do the enrollment process, our Confirm ID is going to grab that unique identifier, match that with provider, and then store it in the database, so that, as we said, whenever the transaction is happening, Confirm ID is going to go look for just that phone. So even if there are 30 phones in that room, it's only looking for the one phone of that provider, and to make that transaction much quicker and secure.
We are also getting out questions about the reliability and accuracy of our fingerprint biometrics. So, we do certainly have documentation on that. They're highly accurate, but we can definitely give you more documentation and specifics. We just encourage you to contact Imprivata directly, and then we can provide you with that documentation. Another question about hands-free, wondering whether it's available in the Imprivata ID app is available for all smartphones. So right now it is available for iOS devices, iOS 8 and above, including iOS 9, which was just recently released. We are looking into other devices, and again, suggest you contact us with your specific needs, and we can talk about sort of our plans to invest in those devices as well. Great. So, John, this is a great question for you. We're seeing sort of out in the field, if a customer does not want to use biometric devices as one of the two factors, what is sort of we seeing as the two factors that are being used, and what would you recommend?
Right. Yeah. So actually, I take that in a couple of ways. But the answer to the question directly is then we're really limited if you're not using fingerprint to you have something I have then and it's something I know, and that's your password and a token. Now, the nice thing about that is that if you're using hands-free, you still have a fast way to do that token and make that part very quick. So you can do a manual token or the hands-free token plus a password, either one of those. The one thing I would say, however, about the general idea of the question though is, and I do get this question a lot, and I've been doing this a lot, is there's a little bit of a stigma out there about fingerprint. There's a lot of organizations that I've run into who've had a bad experience with fingerprints before, and that's from other devices and older technology. And the thing that I usually say to that is one good thing is, it's not my territory, but Ohio, I think it's 8 or 9 years ago, enacted the dual factor authentication requirements, and we ended up putting a lot of fingerprint readers out all over Ohio for secondary authentication. And I think that sort of forced, that's one of the reasons it forced that fingerprint technology to get a little bit better, to be more reliable for us. And since then, we've had a really great response from it, as far as from our customers in Ohio who really like it. And then the other piece to that is that the DEA is requiring the FIPS 201 compliance is actually part of that FIPS 201 compliance. There's two pieces. There's the encryption, but there's also the accuracy level, the resolution requirement. And that resolution requirement also makes that fingerprint reader even better than the ones we were using in Ohio for a long time. And so we're having a really great experience actually with fingerprint readers now, and it's sort of and we're slowly outpacing that stigma of those old fingerprint readers that you might have had on an old dispensing device or something like that. And so I would just caution to not be afraid of fingerprint because of prior experience.
Yeah, because of those high standards. In addition to that, the fingerprint readers that are built into most laptops, or even your iPhone with iTouch, they don't meet those standards that John was talking about. These are much more sophisticated devices. The other thing, and John, you sort of mentioned it, but from a workflow perspective, the hands-free authentication technology works by automatically transferring that token code from a provider's device that's on an Imprivata application. And that application essentially works like a soft token and OTP application, so that when hands-free is not available, maybe they're working from home, it can serve as a traditional token generator that they can manually type. So with just that one application, you sort of have two modalities available to your providers, so they won't need to then carry something else for their home office use, for example. Okay, just a reminder, if you've got any final questions, please get them in via the Q&A function on the WebEx. Just give you another minute here to get your final questions in.
And Dan, while we're waiting for any final questions to come in, I just wanted to remind the audience we have recorded today's session, so if for whatever reason you weren't able to dial in, or you want to share this with someone else on your team, look in your email inbox in the next business day or so, and you're going to get an email from us that has a link to the on-demand version. Second, on the right-hand side of your screen in the chat, I've been posting links to various white papers and other helpful materials about getting ready for EPCS, some recent hospitals that have had successful deployments of EPCS and how they went about those projects. There was coverage in the Boston Globe and Forbes, for example, as well as some additional recent webinars that we've done with WCA Hospital and Cambridge Health Alliance and some others that have had successful EPCS deployments. So they've got a lot of good info to share there as well.
Great. We've got just another question here about hands-free authentication, asking what's sort of the fallback if the hands-free authentication doesn't work or isn't available for whatever reason, and if it's not, again, if it's not available in the first place, if a user is not enabled for that, or there's not a Bluetooth receiver on a particular workstation, then Improvata Confirm ID will recognize that, and it won't present that as an available modality, and it'll ask the provider for another form of two-factor authentication. Maybe there's a fingerprint reader, maybe it's it's fingerprint plus password, or as I mentioned, the Improvata ID application can be used as a soft token generator, so maybe it's password plus token. All right, well, it looks like that's it on questions. I'll turn it back over to Michelle to wrap up.
All right, thanks again for our audience. Great session today. Thanks for all your questions. I did put, and I'm going to put it again right now, this is my direct email address. It's going to go to a live human being. If you're not sure who your account manager is, if you have additional questions that you want answered, go ahead and send those to me. I will get you connected today with the correct person at Improvata to either get your questions answered, or if you're looking for a demo or something like that of anything you've seen today, go ahead and send a note to me. I'll get that right off to the correct person. And thanks again to Dan and John for a great presentation today, and this concludes today's webinar.